Joining us this morning, as we said, Yvette Clarke. She's from New York. She's the chair of the powerful Congressional Black Caucus, represents the 9th Congressional District. I should say, until recently was my congresswoman here in Park Slope. That has now changed. We've talked about redistricting in all kinds of ways. That is one casualty of it. She's no longer my representative. Let me have you react, first of all, to what we saw in Alabama over the course of the last 24 hours here, and draw a broader line here to the way that Democrats respond to that decision by the Supreme Court from a few days ago.
First of all, let me thank you for having me, Dave. It was a massive turnout yesterday, and I think it's only the beginning. All across the South of the United States of America, since the Calais decision, we've seen a rapid fire redrawing of maps that eliminate Democratic seats, and more specifically, seats held by members of the Congressional Black Caucus. These are majority Black districts where voters have had for the past 60 years the opportunity to draw maps that would ensure that they have representatives that reflect their lived experiences and that bring those experiences to Washington, D.C. to make sure that their interests are being addressed in the halls of Congress. This Calais decision is devastating. It really sets us back.
Sorry to step on you there. I was going to say, you said about 19 CBC members are at risk. That's about the third of the caucus. And at the moment, you have more members than you've ever had. So what are you expecting as this sets the stage for kind of more redistricting throughout the South? And how will you cope with that? And you talked a little bit about it, but what that means for representation.
Yeah, well, we expect that there will be more protests, that there will be more individuals across the country who recognize this is not a right versus left scenario as painted by the Supreme Court, who said that it's okay to have political gerrymandering, but that it is actually a racial dynamic here, where the vast majority of Black people still live in the South of the United States of America. And here we are, 60 years, 61 years since the passage of the Voting Rights Act, stripping them of their ability to select candidates, again, that reflect their lived experiences. We also know that Black candidates are running across this nation in different seats and are being victorious in doing so. But the voices of the people are paramount in designing and prescribing policy in Washington, D.C. that will advance their lives. Unfortunately, this decision, though couched as though it's not racial, targets CBC seats in such a significant way that, as you've stated, we could lose up to a third of the members that are currently seated today.
Congressman, what's your prescription for what needs to happen next here? So as you mentioned, there might be more protests here in the near term. Is the solution legislative? Is it going to happen in the courts? I think that decision by the Virginia Supreme Court obviously was so devastating to Democrats who felt quite elated on the heels of that vote in April, and it changed there on a dime. What happens next as you see it? What does Congress need to do here going forward?
Yeah, well, what happens next is that we continue to educate and inform the public of what is taking place and how it impacts a multiracial, multicultural civil society in their legislative representation. We then also push to make sure that Democrats gain the majority in the House of Representatives and the Senate so that we can legislate. We have legislation. John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act that will, put us in a position to make sure that there's clearance and that there is this adverse impact on Black communities across this nation. And then we need to take a look at the Supreme Court. We really need judicial reform because this court has been rigged to be extremist. And as a result of that, we're seeing the dialing back of very significant legislation that have been long held precedent in the United States. And we've got to make sure that the court has balance and that it is truly reflective of an impartial body that can on behalf of the American people.
So what does that mean? Do you think court expansion should be on the table? And do you really think that that's something that realistically would ever get passed in any kind of form?
We're looking at an all of the above strategy here. There are members who have already introduced legislation for an expansion of the court, but there are other ways that we are looking at holding the Supreme Court accountable. They have no ethics, regulations that they abide by. So there's undue influence on this body as a result of that. And we know that there are a number of ways in which we can look at either expansion limits. There are a whole host of ways.
The bulk of a conversation that we had with Mike Lawler, the congressman from upstate New York, also New York, I should say, talking about the Republican message and strategy going into the elections. And I'm curious, how do you distill the Democrats' messaging going into the elections? Does it center wholly around affordability? Give us your sense of what the Democrats' unified message is here going into the election.
Well, we know that there's an intersection between what is taking place under the Trump administration and the impact to the American people. Yes, affordability is critical, and it's at every level, whether it's housing or healthcare, whether it is wages and or the cost of living. People are feeling the corruption of this administration. Right now, we're in a war that was not sanctioned by the United States Congress. How does that even happen in a constitutional democracy? And so, we're going to really we are crafting a narrative that the American people are actually living. And we're going to make sure that they are well aware of every way in which we will counteract that and move this nation forward.
But in order to do that, Democrats have to win in the midterms. At the moment, it seems like Republicans are really having the upper hand when it comes to the redistricting battle. Former Vice President Harris was at a conference this week, and she suggested kind of a no bad ideas brainstorm. We've got some sound we're going to play for you. Oh, I'm sorry. It's a quote. I'll read it to you guys. We talk about what we need to do and think about doing around the Electoral College. We talk about the idea of Supreme Court reform, which includes expanding the Supreme Court, which we mentioned. We invite a conversation about multi-member districts. Do Democrats and do black lawmakers in the face of this court decision need to think more creatively about how to address this? Is there a way, for example, to get the same effect without making it race-based on its face, kind of counter the court with its own argument? Is there a way to do that kind of coming at it sideways? Or do you just have to call it what it is and get representation where it's needed?
There's a whole host, again, it's an all of the above strategy, as former Vice President Kamala Harris has indicated. At the end of the day, in many of these states, what we're seeing is that where Republicans felt that they were creating strongholds, they've actually diluted the population of Republicans in current districts. We're not going to leave any of these districts behind, where we can be competitive, where we can ratchet up voters and get them out. And again, it's not a right versus a left, it's a right versus wrong. And I think there are a whole host of Republicans out there that are hurting, be they farmers in rural communities or folks who are living paycheck to paycheck. Folks are really feeling the pain of this administration. And we're going to appeal to make sure that we can regain this majority.
Let me pivot to the president's most recent trip. So he was in China, meeting with the Chinese president. You sit on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and as Christina and I were saying a little earlier in the show, we're waiting for details on whatever deliverables came out of the meetings that he had over the course of that trip and that summit that he had with President Xi. What did you observe as you watched that meeting unfold, and what are you waiting for? I'd love to get your sense of the productiveness of the trip the president took to China.
I really don't have a readout on it, Dave, to be quite honest with you. It's very difficult when Donald Trump is shaping the narrative to know whether it's an honest shaping of the narrative or it's something that he's crafting for his own purposes. I know that President Xi is a very clever, leader of China. And I know that he's not going to do anything that puts the United States in a position to be competitive with his nation. So we'll see what comes down the road. But at the end of the day, we know that we've got a number of issues with China, the way they operate, the way they steal our intellectual property, what it means. We'll see what it means in terms of opening the Strait of Hormuz, because part of what Donald Trump has said is that China has the relationship with Iran to speak to them in a way in which they can be of support to the United States. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. Congressman, before we let you go, New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani has abandoned his proposal to increase property taxes in the city, but he's still working on this pied-à-terre tax for people whose second homes are in the city and cost over $5 million. Do you think this is a good idea, and do you think this is something that's going to be popular, or could it be a liability for Democrats going into the midterms?
Yeah, I think that he's very focused on the city of New York. And right now, the city has a $5 billion deficit, $5 billion plus. Mm-hmm. And so he's looking at every avenue that he can utilize to fill that gap. And I don't think it's far-fetched to ask those who have been the most privileged in society to give a bit more, particularly if it's their second resident in the United States. I don't know, how far he's gone in terms of conversations and negotiations. We're always under the threat of individuals divesting from New York. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, the status quo can't hold.